I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch network. Melania Trump has found herself with serious criminal exposure. One of the things that we've learned in connection with the House Ways and Means Committee's release of two reports relating to Donald Trump's tax returns from 2015 to 2020 is that Melania Trump jointly filed tax returns with Donald Trump. And under the IRS code, when you jointly file with a spouse, spouses are jointly and severally liable from all liability from fraudulent tax returns. Now, we know that the Trump organization has already been convicted in New York of 17 felony counts for engaging in a tax avoidance scheme whereby benefits were paid to its top executives, yet those benefits were not only not disclosed on tax returns from the Trump organization, but taken as improper deductions, to name just a few of the financial tax chicanery and criminality that was taking place in the Manhattan criminal proceeding where the Trump organization was convicted. And we've reported here that the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, is now looking squarely in the direction of Donald Trump individually as well, not just the Trump organization, but Trump individually for Donald Trump's criminality. Alvin Bragg has brought on Matthew Colangelo. Matthew Colangelo was previously, before joining the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, as a special senior attorney. Matthew Colangelo previously served as the number 3 position in Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, acting as an acting associate attorney general in the Department of Justice. And prior to that, Matthew Colangelo worked within the New York Attorney General's office with Letitia James, and actually Alvin Bragg before Alvin Bragg was elected as the Manhattan District Attorney. And there, Matthew Colangelo helped the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, during the special proceeding investigating Donald Trump's fraudulent valuation scheme of his property, and helped the New York Attorney General's office prepare the lawsuit, the eventual civil fraud lawsuit that was filed against Donald Trump, seeking approximately, or at least $250 million in damages based on the fraudulent valuations of properties by Donald Trump, the Trump organization, and Trump's adult children. And we've talked about here on the MeidasTouch network now that following the guilty conviction of the Trump organization, where Donald Trump himself was not personally a criminal defendant, that the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, is now focused directly on Donald Trump. And we also know that the Department of Justice is also looking into things now, since there was a referral by New York Attorney General Letitia James regarding all of her findings to the Department of Justice, not even mentioning, of course, the fact that the Department of Justice, through the now appointed special counsel, Jack Smith, is engaged in his criminal investigation of Donald Trump for his conduct leading up to, relating to, and following the January 6th insurrection, as well as Donald Trump's theft of thousands of government records, including top secret records and highly classified records that Donald Trump stole. But because Melania Trump is a joint filer on these tax returns, she would be jointly criminally liable as well. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and Melania could turn on Donald Trump and claim a special separation of liability relief or an innocent spouse relief, but she would have to make that claim against Donald Trump. So let me just read for you, though, from the IRS website, from the IRS site, the situation regarding married taxpayers. And what it says is the following. This is from IRS. It's called topic number 205, innocent spouse relief, including separation of liability and equitable relief. And it talks about where a spouse can try to turn on another spouse who would be a tax cheat or a tax fraud when they jointly file, but in very limited circumstances. Here's what it says. Many married taxpayers choose to file a joint tax return because of certain benefits this filing status allows them. When filing jointly, both taxpayers are jointly and severally liable for the tax and any additions to tax, interest, or potential liabilities that arise from the joint return, even if they later divorce. Joint and several liability means that each taxpayer is legally responsible for the entire liability. Thus, both spouses on a married filing jointly return are generally held responsible for all the tax due, even if one spouse earned all the income or claimed improper deductions or credits. And then it talks about types of relief, though, that someone like Melania could seek, but under very special circumstances. One's called innocent spouse relief, provides an innocent spouse relief from additional taxes owed if your spouse or former spouse failed to report income. 2, separation of liability relief provides for the separate allocation of additional tax owed between you and your former spouse or your current spouse you're legally separated from or not living with when an item was reported properly on a joint return. So that's separation of liability relief. And then there's something called equitable relief. But in order to invoke these things, you have to satisfy all of the factors. So, for example, for innocent spouse relief, you must meet all of the following conditions. 1, you filed a joint return that has an understatement of tax that's solely attributable to your spouse's erroneous item. An erroneous item includes income received by your spouse but omitted from the joint return. Deductions, credits, and property basis are also erroneous items if they're incorrectly reported on the joint return. 2, you must establish that at the time you signed the joint return, you didn't know, and here's the key thing, had no reason to know that there was an understatement of tax. And finally, taking into account all the facts and circumstances, it would be unfair to hold you liable for the understatement of tax. Now, all 3 of those factors have to be met for Melania to try to claim that this was all Donald Trump's fault. When we go to factor 2 and factor 3, this is where Melania will definitely lose that argument. Melania must establish that at the time she signed the joint return, she didn't know and had no reason to know that there was an understatement of tax. She clearly had the reason to know. She was clearly on notice here. And then finally, taking into all factors and circumstances, it would be unfair. It wouldn't be unfair here because Melania is directly involved in this. I mean, look, let's just look at the 2019 tax returns, for example. Melania reported $3,848 of modeling income and an exactly equal amount of expenses. She is directly involved here. And just a reminder for you, in 2015 on the jointly filed return, Donald Trump and Melania claimed that their total income was negative $31 million. And that year they paid $641,000 of income tax. In 2016, they claimed that they earned negative $32 million, and that year they paid $750 in income tax. In 2017, they claimed they earned negative $13 million, $12.8 million to be exact, and they paid a whopping total of $750 of federal income tax. In 2018, they claimed that they earned $24 million and they paid $999,000 in federal income tax. In 2019, they claimed that they earned $4.4 million and they paid $133,000 in federal income tax. In 2020, they claimed that they earned negative $4.6 million, and not only did they pay $0, they claimed a $5.47 million tax refund, which they received. And so when you also factor in that tax refund, it basically wipes out any of the income taxes that they paid. So basically, for all of those years, Donald Trump essentially robbed working class Americans and in essence stole $5.47 million. I mean, if you want to take away his other tax payments, sure, you maybe subtract the $1 million in 2018 and the $133,000 and the $641,000 in 2015. So even if you say, let's just round up and say $2 million there, when you add the tax refund Trump received in 2020, he basically, for all of these years, based on the losses that he claimed, he earned, in essence, $3 million from the government. He didn't pay anything. He earned about $3 million by grifting and, frankly, engaging in conduct that looks to be highly suspect and perhaps, and I say perhaps gently, because it looks like it's absolutely criminal conduct taking place here. The returns show questionable private jet expenses, large unsubstantiated charitable deductions, and payments to children. That would raise a red flag for Melania to make sure Melania is on the hook and would be liable here. In other words, she had reason to know. How about the fact that Trump's kids were given gifts disguised as loans to avoid the gift tax? How about that? That would be something that Melania would raise a red flag for Melania. How about the fact that one IRS agent identified large, unusual, questionable items regarding over $80 million in Trump's declared losses on his 28 return? That's something that would raise a flag for Melania, a big, whopping red flag. How about Trump paid $7.5 million for Seven Springs Westchester County mansion in 1995, but on his 2015 tax return, he took a $21.1 million deduction for a conservation easement on that property. That would raise a glaring red flag for Melania. How about just those red flags right there? That's something certainly that New York Attorney General Letitia James should be looking into and making sure that Melania is jointly liable as well in the civil lawsuit seeking at least $250 million. Absolutely, Melania should be named as a defendant in that case with all of the information that we know now. And also, Melania should be a target of Matthew Colangelo, who's now been hired by the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, and there should absolutely be a focus on Melania by the Department of Justice, in addition to Alvin Bragg, in addition to New York Attorney General Letitia James. She is jointly and severally liable as a joint filer, and she needs to be accountable as well. She doesn't just get to pretend that this doesn't exist. I know the first thing that she did after leaving the White House was do her own NFT grift, which I think nobody actually bought it, so they had to buy it themselves. But she tried to do the NFT grift, and she's tried to act like, oh, I don't know, it's all my husband. No, you absolutely knew everything. And according to the IRS, it is, did you have a reason to know? Were there red flags? Were you potentially on notice? And here Melania was absolutely on notice. We will see what happens here, but as the Manhattan District Attorney starts focusing on his criminal charges against Trump, and a lot of well-respected lawyers, a lot of people who have knowledge of what's taking place in the Manhattan District Attorney's office believe that there's going to be criminal charges filed by the Manhattan District Attorneys in the next 3 to 6 months. Will Melania be named as well? That's a question that we will see which way it's answered, but certainly under the code, she would be liable. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit the subscribe button. We are on our way to 1 million subscribers thanks to your incredible support. In addition to hitting the subscribe button, please check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Lots of great exclusive content you can only get on our Patreon, but most importantly, help grow independent media just like ours. So if you can, wherever you are in the world, check it out. We're 100% independent, 100% accountable to you. Patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.